here's how I want to set up this topic. At the end of every podcast, Katie actually comes on over the music, outro music, and says these words: never stop searching for questions. So why do we say never stop searching for questions? So today's episode, that's what we're going to break down. Why is it important that that's where we are? So the very first thing I wrote today is I said the most pivotal moment in my spiritual journey was when I acknowledged my exhaustion of constantly having answers, and I began following my curiosity instead.
Oh, wow. That is beautiful.
Yeah. Do you relate to, I mean, we can get into how, your reaction to that, but what do you think automatically when you hear that?
I absolutely relate to the exhaustion of always having the answer, always having the right answer, and just I think of my son. I thought of my son immediately because he wants answers from me all the time, and I love saying, I don't know. Let's explore that together. And like I've literally said to him, "Mommy doesn't know everything." Like
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to explore them when I don't. And even like you don't always have to find the answer. Sometimes
Right.
you have to live it. You just have to live the curiosity to see if an answer comes to you, and if not, that's okay too.
Yeah. I love that you brought in the child metaphor in this whole thing, or the child example, because when I look back at a lot of my faith, I think there was a sense that I wasn't willing to grow up. I think there's something beautiful about being childlike. I don't want to take away from that. But I think what I've seen in a lot of people in my own experience is as you grow, there are questions that you're facing. But when you're in a system that reinforces answers, you throw, I sort of thought of it like this. There's going to be, by the way, in this episode, there's going to be a lot of metaphors going back to actual construction of like homes, or deconstruction or reconstruction, because that's going to kind of circle on this. And what I thought of was all of our foundations have cracks and holes in them at some point in our life. That's a good thing. What we're faced with is, what do you do with those cracked beams, those cracked pillars? And what my life of faith that I did was wrapping Scotch tape of answers, of certainty around it all, not at all taking care of it. I was thinking of examples because we're talking in kind of high theory right now. Like, for example, there's a common question would be like, okay, why did Jesus die on the cross? If this is the central aspect of your faith, why did Jesus die on the cross? And my answer was always, well, we're sinners and that's the way to heaven.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Sinners, that's the way to heaven. But there's so much to unpack under there, and there's so much mystery in that question, or even in that answer. And so really what happened with me is I started to not be able to ignore that curiosity that I was naturally covering up. And that was essentially one of the things that really led me out of the church, and I would say even led me out of my evangelical Christian faith, is there wasn't room to have that curiosity. There wasn't room to say, I don't know, like you say to your son. And yet there's so much freedom in that. So I want to explore that today. I want to find out, okay, what is it like not only trying to have all the answers, but what is that shift like in life where you can go from being an answer person to a question seeker? How do you do that? And so I kind of want to ponder on that. And then maybe at the end, kind of give an encouragement to our listeners about what we've learned and what we are learning and all of that. So, we know your background, Katie, because you did an episode where you were the guest before you came on and host, and then we've recorded a bunch of episodes where you actually share more of your story. Um, did you grow up with that feeling that you had to have answers? Because you didn't necessarily grow up in like the evangelical church, but like, did you have that in any way?
Oh, absolutely. My mom changed her sects of religion, but there was one underlying theme throughout all of them was that the obeyers of the word of God and of the word of Jesus, they knew the right answers. And when I was questioning my mom's behavior and my feelings of being her daughter, of living in an experience with her, I wasn't allowed to question that because she was a child of God, and she was naturally a sinner, so I just had to talk to God about it and figure it out. Like,
Yeah. Like the questioning was it threatening to her?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because the questioning would undo some of the things that she so strongly believed in and taught you and preached to you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Because I would be like, how is this God okay with how you treat yourself and how you treat your loved ones and your kids? And I mean, I would flip her out
Yeah.
so much, so much until she would like slap me in the face sometimes because it was too much
Wow.
for her. And I had no right to question that. It
Yeah.
wasn't a conversation. Like I wasn't allowed to really question the adults, well, her, not all the adults in my life, but to question and to explore with her and be like, that doesn't really make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's that about?
Yeah. It seems to me that there's a little bit of questions not just threaten your theology, but they threaten the confidence that people can have in you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we go around in life and we want people to trust us. We want to have worth. But I think that questioning basically acknowledges the cracks there. And we want to
Yes.
be super stable houses. There's this saying within the Christian faith and then the Bible of like being the city on a hill that is shining the light. And there's a
Mm.
lot of pressure with that. And when there's pressure, questions, doubt, all that stuff can make it look like it doesn't matter. Um,
Right.
which I think is one of the problems, quite honestly, with a lot of religions who claim to have an answer.
Yeah.
The answer on something is, well, how do you keep reinforcing your castle walls?
There's no room to be human. There's no room to make mistakes and to admit like shit, I'm really struggling with this, or I messed
Right.
up, or I'm not certain of that, and that can be okay. And
Right.
I love the metaphor of having the cracks because somewhere somebody said like that's where the light shines in,
Mm, I
and
love
I
that.
like with the cracks.
Yeah.
I forget who said it, but somebody said it, not
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that you need those because also in architecture, like ginormous skyscrapers, they need to sway and kind of give because
Yes.
if something is too rigid, it will crumble.
Yes. Oh,
And I
man. You're
think
bringing the science, baby. That's good.
am I?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like if you're too rigid, you have so much more to lose. And that was my mom's problem.
Mm-hmm.
She thought she had so much more to lose because she couldn't keep up this facade, you know.
Yeah.
And hers was way too rigid in my opinion.
Yeah.
And when somebody questions that, like you said, when you when you make your identity that rigid, you will break.
Yes.
Where does that leave you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of when I was steeped in my very young Christian faith and I was like really learning how to be a rigid answer giver. Um, I used to be so annoyed by agnostics because I was like,
Mm.
you guys are just these like floating in space. Like, come on. Like, there's an answer right there, and you're just afraid to say, this is what it is. And yet now I look back and I'm like, I think the agnostics actually had it right. Like, I think
Yes.
because I essentially have become an agnostic,
Yes.
we are having an interesting thing happening in our neighborhood right now. And Katie, I don't even know if I've shared this with you, but so my wife and I just moved to a brand new development here in Central Oregon, and we got lucky enough that we found an affordable um, new construction neighborhoods. So we got a house that was newly built, and all of our neighbors are in that same space. So all of the people on my street were all new, and it's been a really cool thing to get to kind of know each other, and we're sort of all in the same,
Mm.
have sort of the same desire to make friends with everybody. But they're doing construction all around our houses as well, because they're building new houses where we live on what kind of looks like farmland right now. um,
Right.
but as is the case in every city, there's just more development happening. Well, one of the things that happened behind our houses is that a company came in and decided to use dynamite to create, holes for, I guess, foundation. I don't know how it works, but they're basically trying to prep the land to build stuff. You
Wow.
don't always have to use dynamite, but it's a very quick way to do it. Therefore, it's cost effective. And so they they haven't taken any precautions whatsoever. They basically came around and loosely asked some people, "Hey, is your house okay? Like any cracks or anything like that?" And then they were like, we're just going to blast. And so many of us didn't really know what that meant. We know there's going to be new development, so we were like, okay, I guess that just happens. Anyway, they took no precautions and started blasting behind our neighbors' houses, and all of their houses are now showing all of these cracks everywhere. The foundation, there's like some major issues happening. These are people whose
Oh
houses
my
were built less than a
gosh.
year ago. So now we're in this legal battle with this. We found out that this company doesn't have a license. They didn't get any permits. So now
Oh no.
we're all in a fight with the city. We're in a fight with the housing development. It is a mess.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I was just gonna say, what a mess.
what a mess. But I say that to kind of go back to our lingering metaphor, which is these houses weren't built to withstand this this explosion that's
Mm.
happening next to us, and rightfully so. Everybody's getting very angry about it. My question is what does a life look like where you can have explosions around you and yet you're okay and you're safe? How do you reinforce a house with also having it be able to have give to the disasters around it?
I love that. And I think it makes me think of just the polarity and the divisiveness that has happened since like 2016 when Trump was elected into office, and
Mm,
how much that divided the country and with people within families. And I'm liberal, and that's what I um, relate. That's the party that I relate to. I don't really keep up with politics a ton,
right.
but because I think it's a big old game and both sides are kind of silly sometimes.
Yep.
but I think you have to hold on loosely. And I've seen people completely write off loved ones, friends through this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think about, I was reading a lot about it, and how people were talking a lot about, ask them why. Ask them more
Mm-hmm.
questions of what led them to those decisions to vote those people in. Where, like, what are their fears? Like,
Yes.
to better understand each other and have them hopefully have a reciprocal conversation where they're asking you questions to why you feel so strongly or not strongly about a certain uh, you know part of their platform, and
Yeah.
I was like, that is so much more of a balanced and healthier foundation to withstand those big blasts, because that was a big blast.
Yeah.
Trump in office was, and it continued to be blastastic, and still it's like, um I can't write off my family members who voted for him. Like, I just couldn't. I didn't understand. I'm sure they didn't understand me.
Right.
um but I heard somebody talking about, like, right now is the time where we need to talk to our people more, ask more questions. And
Ask more questions.
same with all of the racism and all of the bigotry and stuff like that. Like, when a family member or friend makes an inappropriate comment that just feels a little off, like, don't let it slide. Ask more
Mm-hmm.
questions. You don't have to be in their face about it. You don't have to start a screaming match, but you can just try to come from a standpoint of wanting to understand where they're coming from.
Let me also say this and make sure people know we part of the idea of getting into questioning, into a life of questioning, is to maybe eliminate the dualistic world that we live in, where
Mm,
it's like either this or that. And I meant to say at the top of this episode, I'm a little afraid to speak so passionately about this because we could actually be reinforcing dualism, which is, if you are just living in a world of answers, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
right, right,
No,
right, right.
that's where you are. We're just kind of sharing of this beautiful transition of trying to go into more of living a life of searching for questions rather
It
than
makes it
answers.
right, and it makes it muddier. It makes it messier, and it acknowledges that we aren't this or that. We are not. It's not so black and white.
Yes,
It's so gray. All of existence is so gray. There is so much
absolutely.
mystery. There is so much magic. Why would we ever think that we have this whole thing figured out and all the answers? Because we don't even know how to use all of our brain.
Yes.
Like, it's fucking silly to be like, I am an expert, like,
Yeah.
I don't, and we're taught to be an expert, to have all the answers on tests, to have all the answers in your field of
Yeah.
expertise.
Yeah.
Um, and then we support a culture of people not asking for help because they don't want to look like an idiot who doesn't know
Yeah.
the answer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I struggle with asking for help in every facet of life, because it was like, you just got to have the answers, period.
Yep.
And if you don't, sorry,
Yep.
like, and I think that people make a lot, like you said, putting people in boxes. You make an assumption, you take that as the answer that you're looking for without investigating. That
Yeah.
leads
Right.
to that leads to problems.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
Rob Bell talks about on his podcast, the Robcast. He went through the wisdom series. It really opened my eyes, because he was like, he painted this picture of, like, going to a party and observe how many people ask questions, or if they just talk about themselves, about stories that have already happened in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
not really right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not, like, truly in this present moment, because they're telling stories of the past, so they don't really have to, like, be right here right now. And how outside of, like, what's your name? What do you do for a
Mm-hmm.
living? The questions kind of fizzle.
Yeah.
And then it's like story after story kind of one upping. And so my husband and I listened to that together when we were driving across country. And I was like, oh man, it opened my eyes to gathering in a new way. And like he and I both started to notice how often people ask questions, not just in a party setting, but
Mm-hmm.
in general. And it made me want to ask more questions of people like, what are you reading right now? What's really inspiring you? Like outside of, because I don't want to identify it. My job is not my identity.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's not the only question I can ask people.
Yep.
So it made me explore his podcast episodes about the wisdom.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, made me explore questions more.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that word you just said, exploration, because I think that's the basis of a lot of this. I kind of see it. By the way, listeners, I'm not going to apologize about this, but I will kind of apologize. I do speak in metaphors because that's how I relate. But Jesus spoke in parables, so I feel like maybe I'm closer to Jesus than I ever have been in my life. Um, but I kind of see it like this. I see it as the difference between um, standing at the shore with the water going over your feet or being a deep sea diver and going into the exploration space.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Because a
mm-hmm.
lot of us, I think a lot of people who are searching for answers or answer people are standing at the edge of the ocean and telling everybody what's in that ocean.
Yeah.
I think deep sea divers go in and say, I want to find out what's in that ocean. And I think that that's the difference. The problem is way safer to stay on the edge of the
Oh,
ocean than it is to jump into the deep sea.
so safe.
Yes.
So much
And
more comfortable.
absolutely. There's so much fear. But if you're like me, I mean, I'm not sure I would say my resistance to getting into to jumping into the question world was because I was afraid of it. I think I just got so exhausted
Mm,
with being in the answer world that I was so I was so bored. Like
mm-hmm.
I was like, I need something way more
Mm-hmm.
interesting than the simple answers that like Jesus is the way to heaven
Right,
and
right.
that's how it is, or gay people are sin or living a life of sin, or you know there is heaven and hell, and hell is a place where all of this kind of stuff that I just like caked over
Mm-hmm.
um, with those easy answers. Going back to the resistance of living in questions, you had sort of talked a little bit about this. Um, I wrote down this morning when I was thinking about this, the enemy to living in questions is the ego.
Mm-hmm.
The thing keeping you back from questions is, in my opinion, in my view, is satisfying the ego or not.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we have to be right, that our worth is based on what we know, kind of what you were saying, like experts,
Right.
essentially. Um, I think that the beauty of transitioning from into a life of questions is more about the relationship with your ego than it is
Mm.
with anybody around you.
Mm.
We all have the opportunity to go into the curiosity world. But the question is how do you get there? And
Mm.
maybe you're not ready to get there and you're listening to this episode and you're going, I'm actually okay with the life of answers. If that's where you are, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like be there. We're all in our own place. But I guess the question I want to pose to us is what would you say to somebody who is wanting to go into the gray area, is wanting to
Mm.
go there? How, if somebody feels ready to do that, what are some ways that maybe practical or psychological ways that they can move into that territory? I know I'm putting you on the spot, or putting both of us on the spot,
Oh no.
but what
That no, totally fine. It's a question.
it's a question. It's a question.
It's I think that it starts with learning to trust yourself. And if it's too scary to go out and ask other people, start writing the questions down that just come up in yourself, and trust that it's popping up for a reason.
Yeah.
Start writing them down, um, and just start tuning into yourself. And if
Like
you're with
identify it, you're saying? Identify the
yes,
questions that
write
come
down
out.
some of the questions that come up naturally in your daily life, or
Sure.
if or with start asking questions with your spouse or your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets easier because that was one of the things. I didn't trust myself. I was taught not to trust myself. So why would I trust the questions that are coming up? And I don't want to
Yeah.
sound stupid.
Yep.
I don't want to look like a dummy and raise my hand and ask this question. Even though the teacher always said there are no dumb questions.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody always made you feel dumb.
Yep. Yep. It's the truth. Yeah.
And so it is very much tied to your ego, but kind of taking down that wall slowly and learning to trust yourself, and that there is and your intuition asks questions for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I found when I started to trust myself and that intuition, and I started to be uncomfortable and ask questions, it started to give me an energy and not answers, just a better understanding
Mm-hmm.
of other people,
Mm-hmm.
of what I'm allowed to ask. Like I've like just taking up space
Mm-hmm.
and saying like I am allowed to ask this.
Yeah.
Like and that's okay. And
Yeah.
it could feel uncomfortable depending on who it's with, what the content is.
Yep.
But I'm allowed. And
Yeah.
kind of like setting up boundaries in life, the more you
Yep.
do it, it gets easier, but it's still freaking uncomfortable. It can oftentimes be very awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing that I'm trying to do with my son, because kids naturally have questions all the time. And
Yeah.
I don't want to squash his spirit of question asking and exploration, because
And that,
that happened a lot to a lot of us.
yeah. And that's where being childlike is good, because
Mm-hmm.
the child is curious.
Mm-hmm.
And
And they
that
follow their spirit.
absolutely. I love what you said. One of the things I would add in there, I said the biggest hindrance to curiosity is ego. I also think there's a absolute importance of and significance of community in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And we're, the name of our podcast, if you don't know, is The Mass Exodus. And a lot of times we have to exit from the very things that keep reinforcing answers, that
Mm-hmm.
keep reinforcing the pressure of having to qualify answers. And that can be scary and it can be lonely, to do that. There is a risk in that aspect, but maybe that's a place where you are. Maybe it is time to join into that mass exodus, because there's a lot of
Right.
people who have been doing that. And if your community is a community that fosters questions, awesome.
Yes.
Stay there. Encourage those around you to keep doing that. Find those places together. One of the things I was thinking about, going a little out of order, but I was thinking about, I would always say, this is my faith, growing up. Let me share with you my statement of faith. I looked up the definition. I was thinking about faith, and I looked up the definition of faith, and one of the definitions of faith is a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof.
Whoa.
That, to me, says question all over it,
Yeah.
because so many of our faith systems, our faith belief systems, are based on here is proof. Let me show you proof so what I have is valid. And I think the beauty of searching for God, of living in a spirituality, higher power, truth, whatever you want to call it, um, is that faith aspect. And that faith aspect should be propelled by questioning, by
Questions.
not
Yes.
knowing that. Why is it so scary? And this is a redundant question because we've kind of already touched on it, to say, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
okay to say, I don't know. That doesn't mean you're further away from quote unquote God. It actually probably
Right.
means you're swimming in God. you,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes. And in the divinity and like we're spiritual beings.
Yeah.
I my son and husband and I, we have this deck of cards that sits on our dining room table, and every night my son will say, "Let's play the game. Let's play the game." It's our dinner game. And
Okay.
the whole entire deck of cards is just questions. And it could be like, "What vacation or country would you really like to visit?" Or it could be like, "When you make a mistake, how does that feel?" It could be, "What kind of reward do you like to get?" Um, like, what do you wish mommy and daddy did more of? What do you wish they did less of? So there's all these questions, and we go around the table, and sometimes if my son doesn't have an answer, he'll just put his thumbs down and you can pass. You don't
Yeah.
have to conjure up an answer if you don't have one.
Yeah.
And I love it because there's only so many cards in the deck.
Right.
We eat dinner together every night. And so you repeat questions, but maybe today you answer it differently. Maybe in this hour you answer it
Yes.
differently. You don't have to have the same answer to the same question every day.
Yes. And it's boring.
It's
It's
so boring,
boring.
so vanilla. And one more thing, and I won't go on a tangent, but my son is part of a Christian preschool. He has chapel every Wednesday, and I've never gone to a chapel that regularly in my entire life. So he has come back from these chapel days with such amazing questions, and it has led to some really interesting conversations with my husband and my son and I of like, oh, is that what they said? Okay, well maybe it could be like this.
Uh,
Like what was the earth before earth was here? Or and this morning I dropped him off, and they have so much art around the room, and he said, "Hey, look, there's mine." And I said, "Oh, that's really neat. What is it?" And it was just like so much paint on one piece of paper,
okay.
all different colors,
Yeah.
and every single one was different. And I said, "What is that a painting of?" And he said, "What God looks like." And I was like, I just stood there and I just looked around the room then at every single depiction of what every kid painted on that paper of what God looked like. I get
Yeah.
chills. And I was just like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That is yes. That's awesome. Because it doesn't have to be the same answer. One kid had a rainbow. Other kid used different colors. Like
Yeah.
it was just really beautiful. So I was a little nervous because I didn't know anything about this sect of Christianity, but it has been one of the coolest experiences of questions.
Yeah. What I remember, I was 15 and I went with my high school class German club because I was in German class, and we went to Europe, and we went to England in order. We went to England, France, uh, Switzerland, Austria, Germany. But while we
Wow.
were in France, we did all the touristy things. And while we were in France, we went to the Louvre. If you don't know what the Louvre is, that's where Mona Lisa, the painting of Mona Lisa is, and also the Da Vinci Code movie book takes place there. So you might find Tom Hanks around. Anyway, walking around. But I went in there and it was packed. everybody was everywhere. Of course, you could hardly get to where Mona Lisa was. It was just a huge crowd around. But when I look back at that experience, as awesome as it was to be there, I kept on thinking, I keep thinking now about how there could be 20 people surrounding some abstract painting, and all 20 people are seeing this painting, same thing, seeing it very differently, having a different emotional response to it, seeing maybe some kind of truth in it. Much like your son with this, with this artwork of saying, that's God to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think is so beautiful. And that's where the world of questioning
Mm-hmm.
invites us into. It invites us into the place of being able to say, it's okay to see things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, tell me how you see it differently.
Yes, I
Instead
want
of
to
me just
know.
sitting here, because I could have stood in that Louvre and I could have turned around with a megaphone and told everybody, "Hey, let me tell you, this is what is happening here." And you know what? There's a lot of religious people who are doing that. And a lot
Yeah.
of politics and a lot of stuff that claims to have truth are standing in an art gallery around a bunch of people and saying, "Let me tell you what the truth is here. Let me tell you how I see it."
Right.
We don't all see
And
things the same way.
absolutely, some people don't even see color the same way.
Right.
And it's completely color is relative to how your eyes and your head work.
Yeah.
And art, coming from an art background, art is your expression that is coming out of you, and once you put it out into the world, you have absolutely no control how it is perceived by anybody else. And I feel like the mysteries of the universe are kind of like that, and God, like,
Right.
it's so intimate and for you to decide. Like, even if you write an artist statement, it's merely just an opinion of the artist, but what you see does not mean you have to see the same exact thing. Like, whatever you feel from it is yours, and that's
Yes.
true. It's true for you.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of art. And like, in art critiques, that could get really trippy because
Right.
your fellow classmates, it was, I mean, so those were some of the most heated moments of my college career, and it was constant art critique. And so you came in there kind of bearing your soul in a photograph or in a painting or whatever your medium was,
Yeah.
and you had to either be ready to put up your dukes and fight with somebody who disagrees with you, or just to be accepting that not everyone has to think like you, and not
Yeah.
everyone has to see the same
Uh-huh.
thing that you see in this piece that you made.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's the beauty of humanity. You could take the biological feature that all of the lenses of our eyes are all different. And that's a beautiful thing. And if we learn from each other of how we see things, maybe we can see something differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
If you're open to it.
If you're open to it. And that's the point of this episode, is an encouragement that wherever you are, there is a beautiful journey when you can transition and follow your curiosity. Here's my last metaphor. So, this is much like the ocean metaphor. Um, I just got done watching a movie that I think Katie and I are going to do an episode on, which is a movie called Don't Look Up. And it I won't go into explaining the premise. You can Google it. There's a lot of views of space. Um, the short version is there's a comet flying to Earth that's going to destroy Earth, and the movie is based around the reactions to that. And I was thinking about this episode and us talking about the questions, and I was like, I think I would say this is very much like do you look in life through the lens of a telescope into the vast, or do you take the opportunity to actually go into the galaxy and explore?
Mm.
Both are okay, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to take a look. We all see things differently. But are we giving ourselves an opportunity to actually float in the infinite space and see what we can find instead of just staying behind the telescope and looking through a small little lens, magnifying lens?
So when I was little, God and all of that was so terrifying to me because to me it was an answer that if I
Mm.
didn't believe that answer, I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so reconnecting with it and saying prayers with my son and exploring God and what that means and all of that has been a gift because I get to do it over asking questions instead of searching for the answers.
Mm.
Because it was because nobody's wrong.
Yes. I love that. I also want to just say how much I love that you brought your relationship with your son into this. Um, Not to repeat ourselves, but I know in scripture that Jesus referred to being childlike, going back to that. And there is, as much as we need to grow into the second half of life, we need to get past the dress rehearsal of heaven. We also just need to remember to hold on to that essence as a child when everything is mysterious and it's weird and it's
Mm-hmm.
abstract. And I want to know things. I want to know things. I want to know things. That is a great place to end. And so you did get the last word, but I'm going to kind of have the last word now. So, uh, I do want to just acknowledge our listeners to say you probably, if you listen to this episode, um, you probably have a lot of stuff that you're saying while we're going, like, I wish you guys would have touched on this. Like, how about this? How
Sure.
about this? Obviously, this is two people who have a perspective that we're sharing together. Um, as always, I invite you on our social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, email us, teach us. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the point is like we have a podcast, but this is not a podcast of answers. This is a podcast of questions, which is circling right back to why we say at the very end, never stop searching for questions. So teach us, share with us your perspective. We want to know, we want to grow in that, and we want to connect with you. So hopefully you'll do that. But
Ask
yeah,
us ask
yeah.
us your questions.
Nah, she had to have the last word. Okay.
No.
Um, I'm just kidding. I love this. The beauty is there's no last word, right?
No.
That's the whole idea. There's no periods. No
Boom.
periods. Run on
Boom.
sentences. That is life. Run on sentences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. Be well, friends. Jump into the mystery of life and find the freedom in knowing that you don't have to know everything.
Mm-hmm. It gets weird, but it's magical.
There it is. It's weird, but it's magical. That's life. Okay. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.